Hello, everyone. Today, we're breaking down a case unlike anything we've covered before. If you think this is just another story with an obvious motive, think again. What we're about to examine is an almost unbelievable situation. A brutal crime takes place inside a tightly controlled, high-security environment. The entire incident is captured by surveillance cameras, yet the shooter somehow gains an enormous head start and manages to leave the country. And the most puzzling part of this investigation is that the person who unknowingly creates the perfect escape window for the offender is the victim's own husband. How is that even possible, both legally and practically? What would make someone ignore emergency responders and conceal the sound of gunfire inside their own apartment? Let's go through the facts. The morning of April 16th, 2026. Mexico City. Our story takes us to Polanco, one of the city's most exclusive, upscale, and heavily secured neighborhoods. Luxury boutiques line the streets, world-class restaurants are everywhere, and the French embassy sits just a block away. This is one of the safest districts in the city. Smart surveillance systems monitor virtually every intersection, and residential buildings are staffed by security personnel around the clock. On that seemingly ordinary morning, a man walks confidently into the local prosecutor's office. His name is Alejandro Herrera. He's not alone. His personal attorney is standing beside him. Alejandro approaches the clerk on duty and, without any visible emotion or hesitation, calmly says that his wife's body is inside their apartment. Let's stop for a second and think about that from a normal human perspective. You find the mother of your daughter with no signs of life. What's the first instinct for almost anyone? Call emergency services immediately. Contact the police from the scene. Try to perform CPR. Do something. But Alejandro ignores every one of those basic instincts. Instead, he contacts an attorney first, establishes his legal strategy, leaves the apartment, and personally goes to a government office to give his statement. It's hard not to notice how calculated that sequence of events feels. It sounds far more like the actions of someone carefully thinking several moves ahead than the reaction of a husband overwhelmed by shock. Investigators immediately respond to the address in Polanco. Officers enter the luxury apartment and find Carolina Flores exactly where Alejandro said she would be. The young woman has passed away. Crime scene investigators secure the residence and begin collecting evidence. The physical evidence leaves little room for doubt. A firearm was used. According to the official forensic report, Carolina suffered 4 gunshot wounds. The round struck her left cheekbone, her neck, and entered the back of her head twice from different angles. On the floor, investigators recover between 6 and 7 spent 9mm shell casings, along with 4 intact projectiles collected as evidence. Everything about the scene indicates the shots were fired with the clear intent to leave no chance of survival. While Carolina's body is being prepared for transport to the medical examiner's office, and investigators officially open a criminal case into an intentional homicide, another team of officers makes a discovery that changes everything. In another room of the very same apartment, they find someone alive. It's Carolina and Alejandro's 8-month-old son, Alex. He's completely unharmed, calm, fed, well cared for. At that point, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. Alex had not been left alone. Someone had been looking after him inside that apartment, just a few feet away from the scene of the crime. And this is where the investigation runs into the timeline that completely shatters the original theory of what happened. The medical examiner examines Carolina and reaches a firm conclusion. She did not pass away that morning. The gunshots were fired almost 24 hours earlier, during the afternoon of April 15th. Take a moment and put those facts together. An entire day. For nearly 24 hours after the gunfire, Alejandro never leaves the apartment. He remains inside with his wife's body and his infant son. His cell phone is working. He has full access to the outside world. Yet he creates complete silence around himself. During those hours, the person who pulled the trigger had more than enough time to pack, drive to the airport, check in for an international flight, and disappear onto another continent. Alejandro didn't just stay silent. He effectively handed the offender an entire day to escape. So who entered that apartment on April 15th? And what exactly was Alejandro doing during those 24 hours of isolation while keeping himself hidden from the outside world? That's where this investigation truly begins. To understand how this deadly trap was set inside a luxury apartment in the heart of Mexico City, we need to rewind the story a few years and leave the capital behind. Our next stop is Ensenada, a coastal city in the state of Baja California, along Mexico's Pacific shoreline. This is where Carolina was born on April 4th, 1999. She wasn't someone who stayed out of the spotlight. Quite the opposite. Carolina lived a very public life. She was building a modeling career, growing her presence on social media, and steadily attracting a large and loyal audience of followers. In 2017, that hard work paid off when she earned a prestigious regional title in a major beauty pageant. She came across as outgoing, approachable, and full of ambitious plans for the future. Then, in 2021, she met Alejandro. Public records don't fully agree on his occupation. Some sources identify him as an engineer, while others describe him as a businessman. Their relationship moved quickly, and the couple decided to build a life together in Ensenada, close to Carolina's family and longtime friends. In August 2025, they welcomed their first son, Alex. On the surface, it looked like another milestone in the life of a happy young family. But Alex's arrival became the catalyst for something completely different. As investigators worked to reconstruct the growing conflict inside the household, they interviewed Carolina's closest relatives and friends. Her mother, Reina Gomez, along with several close friends, gave detailed statements about what had been happening behind closed doors. As those interviews continued, another key figure slowly came into focus. Erica Maria Guadalupe Herrera, Alejandro's 63-year-old mother. Witnesses didn't describe her as merely overbearing. They portrayed her behavior as deeply unhealthy and openly destructive. According to multiple statements, Erica repeatedly told Carolina that she did not consider her part of the family. In her mind, there was only one real family: herself and her son. Reading through those witness statements, one thing really stands out to me. The level of psychological pressure Carolina was living under is hard to ignore. After Alex was born, the situation reached an entirely different level. Erica began trying to control virtually every aspect of daily life, from what Alex was fed to Carolina's appearance and even her weight. What started as extreme overprotectiveness gradually turned into open hostility and constant criticism. At first, Carolina genuinely tried to keep the peace. She chose diplomacy, avoided confrontation, and did everything she could to smooth things over. But it didn't take long for her to realize that there was simply no reasoning with that level of possessiveness. In December 2025, just 4 months before everything unfolded inside that apartment, the couple made a drastic decision. They suddenly left the life they had built in Ensenada and moved thousands of miles away to Mexico City. Think about how significant that decision really was. Carolina walked away from the city where her career was taking off, where her parents lived, and where she had the strongest support system in her life. When they moved, they even had to leave behind their golden retriever, Luca, in the care of Alejandro's mother. This didn't look like an ordinary relocation for a better job or a fresh start. In reality, it looked much more like an escape. A physical attempt to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Alejandro's mother's constant presence. Carolina genuinely believed that putting thousands of miles between them and settling into a heavily secured residential complex in the capital would create a barrier that couldn't be crossed. On paper, the plan made perfect sense. No face-to-face contact. No more conflict. But distance rarely stops someone whose sense of attachment has become deeply unhealthy. Have you ever thought about how vulnerable someone becomes after voluntarily leaving behind everyone they know? In trying to build a safe haven in a new city, Carolina unintentionally placed herself in almost complete social isolation. And when everything finally fell apart, there was simply no one nearby who could step in for her. Now let's return to the investigator's office on April 16th, 2026. By this point, detectives have already established one critical fact. Carolina had remained inside that apartment for nearly 24 hours before authorities were notified. Now they need to find out exactly what happened during that missing day. Their immediate objective is straightforward. Get Alejandro to explain what he was doing during those 24 hours of complete isolation. It isn't until 1:35 that afternoon, after arriving at the prosecutor's office, that Alejandro makes his very first phone call. He takes out his phone and dials Reina Gomez, Carolina's mother. Reina answers, expecting what had become a familiar routine. Most of the time, either Carolina or Alejandro would video call so she could see how quickly Alex was growing. Instead, Alejandro greets her with a flat, emotionless sentence. Mrs. Gomez, Caro is dead. The words leave her completely stunned. One detail about that phone call really stands out. There was no attempt to prepare her, no expression of sympathy, no effort to soften the news for a mother who had just lost her daughter. Just a cold statement of fact. Reina immediately breaks down, crying into the phone. In the background, she hears women talking and desperately clings to the hope that this is some kind of terrible misunderstanding. She begs Alejandro to tell her it's a cruel joke. She asks him to put Carolina on the phone. But Alejandro quickly shuts that down. He explains that the voices belong to employees at the prosecutor's office and says he's giving an official statement. Then he adds one sentence that immediately changes the direction of the entire investigation. My mother was the one who shot her. At that moment, investigators officially identify their first suspect, Erica Maria. The next question investigators ask Alejandro is the one that matters most. Why didn't he contact emergency services immediately? His answer leaves detectives stunned by how cold and calculated it sounds. According to Alejandro, his only priority during those hours was protecting Alex from the legal system. He claimed he was terrified of what would happen once police arrived. His reasoning was simple. Since they had no relatives in Mexico City, he believed responding officers would immediately place Alex into temporary protective custody while the investigation was underway. So what was Alejandro actually doing while the person accused of pulling the trigger was leaving the city without interference? He was recording instructional videos, calmly, methodically. He used his phone to film tutorial-style videos explaining how to properly feed his son in case he was arrested and sent to jail. It's hard to process that sequence of events. In one room, his wife had lost her life. In another, he was speaking to a camera, creating feeding guides for whoever might eventually care for Alex. But the most disturbing detail from those 24 hours surfaced later. It was made public by independent attorney Blanca Yvonne Olvera after she reviewed the case files. According to those records, Alex refused to drink infant formula. Alejandro then walked over to Carolina's body. He manually expressed breast milk from a woman who was no longer showing signs of life, so he could fill a baby bottle. That single act completely changed the legal direction of the investigation. Authorities viewed the use of the victim's body in that manner as an act of desecration. That disturbing detail prompted prosecutors to reconsider their original findings. On April 21st, 2026, the prosecution officially changed the classification of the case. The original intentional homicide charge was removed from the file. Instead, prosecutors reclassified the case as femicide, a charge under Mexican law that includes aggravating factors involving extreme cruelty and degrading treatment of the victim. Investigators now had a detailed timeline of Alejandro's actions inside the apartment. The next urgent question was obvious. Where had the armed suspect gone during the 24 hours Alejandro had unknowingly provided? Mexico City investigators immediately began tracing possible escape routes. They requested records from transportation hubs and airports, covering April 16th. That's when they discovered an extraordinary coincidence. At the very same time, Alejandro was sitting inside the prosecutor's office, giving his statement. His mother was physically leaving the country. Step by step, detectives reconstructed her route. She purchased a ticket for an international flight, cleared customs without incident, and departed Mexico. After a layover in Panama, she eventually landed in Venezuela. Once there, she didn't disappear into a cheap motel or a budget hostel. Instead, she quietly rented a luxury apartment. Think about how perfectly those timelines line up. One close family member spends nearly 24 hours delaying contact with law enforcement. At that very same time, the other is crossing international borders. The international search finally produces a breakthrough about 2 weeks later. On April 29, 2026, Venezuelan authorities identify Erica Maria's exact location. Officers arrive at the luxury residence where she's staying to take her into custody. But she refuses to cooperate. According to the official reports, Erica is genuinely outraged by the officers' arrival. She insists she's in her own home and hasn't done anything wrong. After physically resisting law enforcement, local authorities arrest her for refusing to comply with lawful orders and hold her for 48 hours. That brief window turns out to be critical. It gives Venezuelan officials enough time to coordinate with investigators in Mexico, confirm the international notices, and begin the lengthy extradition process. When Erica is taken into custody, investigators seize her cell phone. Soon afterward, Venezuelan journalist Justin Montilla publishes digital evidence recovered from the device. Among the files are draft messages Erica had been typing into the Notes app on her smartphone. The entries are dated April 18th. Pay close attention to that date. 3 days have passed since the shooting. The investigation in Mexico City is already in full swing. Carolina's family is making funeral arrangements. But what investigators find in those digital notes reveals a worldview that seems completely detached from reality. Erica addresses the messages to her son. In them, she expresses overwhelming relief that Carolina is supposedly recovering. She writes that she had been deeply worried about the harm that had been done, and says she's happy to learn that her daughter-in-law is expected to recover soon. It's difficult to reconcile those words with the known facts. According to the investigation, someone fires multiple shots at point-blank range. Yet in her private notes, Erica creates a version of events in which Carolina suffered what sounds like little more than a minor injury and would soon be discharged from the hospital. The drafts also contain an attempt to explain why she had a firearm in the first place. According to her own notes, the pistol was carried strictly for self-defense. She writes that traveling alone with luggage and her dog made her feel vulnerable, so the handgun was meant only to provide protection during the trip. Think about that explanation for a moment. A weapon supposedly carried for protection against a hypothetical street robbery somehow ends up loaded inside her own son's apartment. But the most significant part of those leaked notes isn't the explanation for the gun, it's the motive. In her own writing, Erica explains what made her reach for the weapon. According to her version of events, the trigger wasn't a physical threat. It was Carolina's smirk, and what she described as a dismissive tone during their conversation. Erica even wrote that she wanted to wipe that smile off Carolina's face. Think about what that means. According to those notes, an ordinary facial expression during a family argument became the reason she decided to use deadly force. For investigators, those writings became something extremely valuable. They weren't just theories anymore. They were the suspect's own words describing her state of mind and what she claimed motivated her actions. Now detectives had only one major piece of evidence left to examine: the hidden video recording from inside the apartment. It was time to reconstruct, second by second, what happened on April 15th. Now that we've gone through the messages, it's time to close the final gap in the timeline. To reconstruct the events inside the apartment, investigators seized the recording from that hidden camera. We return to Wednesday, April 15th, the day the shots were fired. The family's normal routine is interrupted by a call. The building's security desk receives a notification. Alejandro's mother has arrived downstairs without any warning. She's carrying luggage, a bag of dog food, and the family's golden retriever, Luca. The security guard asks her to wait in the guest lobby. A short time later, Carolina and Alejandro return from shopping. Not wanting to leave her downstairs, they bring her belongings upstairs and invite the unexpected guest into the apartment. This is where the investigation's most important silent witness comes in. Near Alex's crib in the living room sits a portable baby monitor with a built-in camera. It captures part of the room and records audio continuously. The family used it to keep an eye on Alex while they were busy elsewhere in the apartment. Without interruption, that camera records everything that happens next. What's remarkable is how completely ordinary everything looks just minutes before the situation changes forever. Nothing in the footage suggests an argument is about to happen. Everyone is simply sharing the same space. Carolina changes into a comfortable robe. Erica then asks her son to take Alex into the bedroom because she wants to speak with Carolina privately. Alejandro agrees. He picks up Alex, walks into the bedroom, and closes the door behind him. The two women are left alone. The conversation begins in a completely calm, ordinary tone. They're casually talking about an upcoming road trip. At one point, Erica asks for a glass of water. Carolina gets up and walks into the kitchen. Both dogs happily follow her. The kitchen sits outside the camera's field of view, but Erica's actions remain perfectly visible. She slowly stands up from her chair, slides her hands into her pockets, then carefully looks around, checking whether her son's bedroom door is closed. Once she's certain no one is watching, she takes a few steps and walks out of frame. From that moment on, only the microphone tells the story. 6 loud gunshots echo through the apartment. Only one of the family's small dogs runs back into view, clearly terrified. The golden retriever never returns. According to investigators, the dog was struck by a bullet alongside Carolina. Carolina never comes back from the kitchen. Immediately after the gunshots, the bedroom door opens. Alejandro walks into view. The recording captures his reaction. He doesn't rush to check for signs of life. He doesn't reach for his phone to call emergency services. Instead, in a calm, almost emotionless voice, he asks, "What have you done? Are you out of your mind?" The response that follows becomes one of the most significant pieces of evidence in the case. "Your family is me. You belong to me. She took you away from me." After saying those words, Erica picks up her coat, opens the apartment door, and walks away. One question still remains difficult to explain. This is a luxury residential building. The sound insulation isn't perfect. 6 gunshots ring out inside an apartment, yet not a single neighbor on that floor reacts. No member of the security staff calls for police. No immediate response follows. The sounds simply fade into the background, leaving one man alone inside a locked apartment with Carolina's body. And we already know what he chooses to do with that silence over the next 24 hours. On April 17th, 2026, Carolina's body was released to her family for burial. Officials in her home state publicly promised their full support. But by then, carefully worded government statements were no longer enough to calm public outrage. The moment footage from the baby monitor found its way online, the investigation stopped being just a criminal case. It became a nationwide public debate. On April 25th, thousands of people marched through the streets of Ensenada. The demonstration stretched from the Center for the Arts to Revolution Park. And who do you think became the primary focus of that public anger? Not the woman accused of pulling the trigger, whose actions were documented on video. Instead, much of the public's attention turned to Alejandro. On social media, public pressure on prosecutors quickly reached another level. People began demanding that investigators examine whether Alejandro played any role in what happened. Many called for prosecutors to review bank records and determine whether any large life insurance policies had been taken out in Carolina's name shortly before the move to Mexico City. When a husband voluntarily gives the person accused of the crime an entire day's head start, it's not surprising that people start asking difficult questions. As of today, Alejandro has not been formally charged with any crime. But in the court of public opinion, many people have already reached their own conclusions. This case is far from over. Erica Maria remains in custody in Venezuela, while the extradition process moves through the legal system. Alex has been left without his mother. Carolina was only 27 years old. By all accounts, she was simply trying to establish healthy personal boundaries and protect the people she loved from someone else's escalating obsession. Instead, that decision ultimately cost her her life. I'll continue following every legal development in this case. As soon as the court reaches a decision regarding Alejandro's legal status and the extradition process moves forward, we'll break down every new detail together. And until then, pay close attention to the warning signs in the people around you. Ignoring them can sometimes have consequences no one ever expects.